What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of BULLDozed. I'm Drew Stevens alongside my player partner, Josh M. Hicks. Josh, what's going on?
What's good, Drew? It's nice to see you on the other side of the mic today. I'm kind of happy to see you doing your thing on this mic, coming in real smooth. The intro's nice. We off to a good start. I mess with it.
Hey, we gotta switch it up, keep people on their toes a little bit, man. Speaking of keeping people on their toes, so we're recording this podcast on a Thursday. It is a week before the NBA draft, and our man Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports reported today that the Bulls have gauged interest in Zach LaVine from some teams around the league. I believe this is the first time that it's been put out there so specifically that the Bulls are the ones kind of taking the temperature on what teams may give up for Zach LaVine instead of other teams coming to the Bulls and seeing what it would take to pry him away from Chicago. But Josh, when you read that, when you heard about this, I know what your thoughts were, but tell the world, tell everybody else what was going through your mind.
I love it. I love it. But let's be honest, for the record, out of everybody, for the most part in this circle, I have been the one that's been very pro Zach LaVine. Okay, you know this, Drew. I'm a very much a pro Zach guy. I like what Zach LaVine's skill set is. I like the fact that it's very unique and rare for his size, and he's so young. And quite frankly, it's the perfect platform to kind of grow into what he wants to be, which is the number one option of a championship level type of team. There's only one problem. Right now, he ain't there yet. And actually, there's actually another problem. The Bulls are nowhere near that. It's not just him. So because of that, the Bulls have to do what they have to do as far as looking at all options available possibly to revamp the roster in the way that they know they need to do. We've been having, these different conspiracies per se about which direction the Bulls are going to go. Because it went from continuity, we're going to keep the core, we got to keep the core together, to we'll look at every option possible, but as we're doing that, we want to let everybody know we want them all to come back. And it's like, stop playing this torn level here. You actually commit to something. Commit to a direction where you're trying to go. And it appears that Acme is actually doing what we want them to do. See what's out there. Be aggressive and see what, options that the Bulls can potentially evaluate and take advantage of and exploit. This is giving me the early vibes of Acme when they first arrived. When they first pulled the trigger at the trade deadline to get Vucevic to Chicago to pair up with Zach LaVine when they first got here. They had some time to evaluate the team, had a few months, and they said, nah, this ain't it. We gotta pull the trigger now. So they pulled the trigger. Well, guess what? This is the beginning of what that process looks like. Am I saying that Zach LaVine is going to be gone? No, I'm not saying that at all. But the fact that they're being that bold enough to say, you know what? Our best player in our roster is available. Let's see what we can get for him. God, it feels good to have a front office that moves like that. And especially since we know Zach LaVine wasn't necessarily a lock-in anyways. We've heard the rumors even back to during the season in the trade deadline regarding, how the Bulls were trying to see what his market was going to be like. So because of that, they're continuing those efforts. It's in a good way. It's great that they're doing that, but it also gives you question marks as far as if they were to unload off of Zach LaVine, what does that mean for DeMar DeRozan? What does that mean for people like Vooch, who is trying to get a long-term, trying to re-sign back with the Bulls, which most likely looks like it's going to be most likely like a 3-year extension? What does that mean for those two? Because whether we like it or not, part of the reason why they want to stay is because of Zach LaVine. So it's a lot of question marks as far as what direction they wanted to go. But the fact that they're letting Zach know up front, hey, we love you, bro, but we not tied to you like you think. Keep you on them toes like you mentioned. Yeah, Cinderella ain't too happy about losing that shoe.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that they need to keep everything in front of them, when I say they, I'm speaking of Mark Eversley and Arturas Karnisovas, just in terms of how can they improve this team? You know, we know that they're up against it in terms of how much money they have to play with and being over the cap, what they can do with a limited ceiling in terms of ownership's willingness to go into the luxury tax. So I think they have to keep everything in front of them. One thing that kind of interests me is now that this is out there, does that put a hold on their negotiations with Vucevic? Because if you get a deal for Zach that you really like you alluded to, that kind of changes the math on this team. You would think, unless Acme is that sold on being just good enough where they keep Vucevic, they keep DeMar DeRozan, maybe even extend him and keep running this thing back without Zach LaVine. I heard that kind of floated out there today. I think that anytime you're trading somebody who is as gifted of a scorer as Zach LaVine, somebody who just earned a max contract, the most money in franchise history, someone who in my mind is the most appealing asset you have on your team, if you trade him, to me, that should signal a rebuild. But, you know, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, of course, because this is not even the dog days of summer, but just kind of the slop of the summer before the draft hits and free agency hits. And we have a long way to go before we figure out where this thing actually goes. But we do know that Jake Fisher has spoken to some teams, and these teams are telling him that the Bulls have a steep valuation for LaVine. Like, they're looking to get a deal that might make teams queasy, is how Jake Fisher put it on a podcast that he has with Dan Devine called Ball Don't Lie. One thing that he brought up in that podcast episode was that Zach LaVine was flirting with the Portland Trailblazers before he re-signed and got that 5-year max. He made it clear that he didn't know if Portland was still interested in acquiring him now, but that's something that he's keeping his eye on. He also thinks that the Bulls would most certainly have to think long and hard about a deal that involves the Blazers' number 3 pick, Anthony Simons, and Shaedon Sharpe. But he made it also clear that Shaedon Sharpe, from what he's being told, is someone that the Blazers do not want to hold on or do not want to involve in any type of deal. They want to try to hold on to him for the foreseeable future. But in your mind, what would a deal look like that makes you comfortable with the Bulls trading away Zach LaVine, knowing, as you said, that you're a big Zach guy? I think you and I, out of our group, out of our circle, are pretty much the only ones that have kind of stayed on that Zach train throughout, especially this last season. But is there a deal out there, or is there what are the ingredients of the deal that you would be okay with?
Well, at this point, you got to consider the contract, right? He just finished his first year of a $250 million deal. So you still got another at least 3 to 4 years of this thing before he even thinks about even trying to opt out of the deal. So you got to be willing to take on that type of bread. But on top of that, let's be kind of serious here. You can get a decent amount, but it ain't going to be a whole lot. It's not like Zach LaVine is a championship contender. Yes, he's dropping 20. He can drop 25 a game, and he's shooting ridiculous stat numbers. But, you know, he's not the best two-way player in the league. He hasn't been on a winning team per se, so he doesn't know what it's like to consistently win in big moments. There's not much that you can boost the morale outside of the fact that he's pretty much my age at 28, which is going to be 29 real soon. And, he's a scoring machine. I mean, outside of that, I don't see teams knocking down the door to observe that type of contract when there's no guarantee that his level of play equates to winning basketball. And because of that, what are the Bulls willing to give up or to get back for that is you don't know. You can't really say. I think the deal that could have been sent was when they looked at the Knicks, and I think the Knicks were willing to give up Josh Hart and a couple other picks per se, something like that for him. They said no to that. I don't know if you're gonna get anything bigger than that. I really don't. But the reality is, whatever deal that they do with Zach, the other team has to be willing to take on that max deal. You mentioned Portland. Once Portland figures out what they're gonna do with Dame, I mean, you kind of got to put that on hold. And I don't know if they want two max players like that in the backcourt again on their roster, because they saw what it looked like between Dame and CJ. So I don't know if they want to go back through that scenario. I think the only way this can work in a lot of different areas for the Bulls is 3 or 4 team trades. You need other teams to be involved to max out the value you can get. And I don't know what that looks like, especially if you have Portland in the mix, because Dame already made it known there's some players he likes to play with. And one of them, obviously, we mentioned Miami with Bam Adebayo, if he was to get traded. But the other one that's intriguing, and we've talked about this before, is what Brooklyn's going to have. He likes to play with Mikal Bridges. And if you can get a 3-team deal with the Bulls, last time we did the math, if you can get Zach and Mikal Bridges to Portland, Chicago gets Anthony Simons, a first-round pick, and Nick Claxton, while Jurkic and I think another player goes to Brooklyn with a first-round pick. I mean, that's something that's going to have to be sort of. I don't know if the Bulls could do any better than that, considering the circumstance. But clearly, teams have to be willing to take on that type of max deal. And quite frankly, knowing that Zach LaVine doesn't equate to necessarily winning basketball, or at least as of yet, I don't know if people going to be really wanting to take that type of risk with him.
I hear what you're saying, but I think the type of player that Zach is, his game is so geared for the style of play nowadays. He's such a gifted scorer and shooter, somebody who the past 4 seasons has shot at least 41% on catch and shoot threes. He's somebody that can pair perfectly well with like what we want to call a true number one type player. Mm-hmm. You put him next to a guy like that, and I think it changes the narrative on what kind of player Zach is and how much help he can be to a contending team. I don't necessarily think that his value is low. I don't think it's low. I think it's somebody that works so tirelessly on his game that some of those questions you may have with giving certain players max deals or a lot of money, you don't have with him. You know he's going to continue to work hard. He's somebody who, even though he has his flaws with his basketball IQ and ball handling, especially in critical situations, he's somebody who seems to be very driven by winning. Now, I will also say he also seems to be somebody who, at the same time, I think wouldn't feel too bad if he looks really good and the team loses, if that makes sense. Like there's a little dichotomy there, and I think some people might agree with me there, just in having watched Zach and the way he moves. But let me put it to you this way: there's another guy who reportedly is going to be on the market as well, similar to Zach, and that's Bradley Beal.
I'm glad you brought him up.
Him and his agent and the Wizards seem to be working on, what kind of deal can make him happy enough to be moved and to waive that no trade clause, and for the Wizards to get enough back to feel that their rebuild or whatever direction they're trying to pivot to is getting off on the right foot. Do you think Zach would command a bigger return than Bradley Beal would?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to say yes. More specifically because he's younger. So when you think about a rebuild, you can actually plug Zach in a rebuild right now and accelerate that rebuild process because he's young, but he's so, like you said, so talented and so gifted. But it also depends on who else joins the party. Now, if you wanted to do a Bradley Beal, Zach LaVine swap, that's kind of ideal. Contracts match up, different situations for different modes moving forward. And if you want to be technical, if the Bulls really want to keep the core, I don't know how Bradley Beal and DeMar DeRozan would work out, but Brad with Vooch, I kind of mess with that, I'm not saying by any means or any stretch that this is what the Bulls need to do, but I will be naive to sit here and say I cannot sit here and think that the Bulls are not thinking that, or even Bradley Beal's not thinking that, because there's too many connections, too many ties. Bradley Beal's is home with St. Louis. St. Louis is 4 hours away, man. Like, that's the Midwest city that Missouri is rooting for. It's Chicago. And on top of that, his college coach was Billy Donovan. He's the head coach. So you can't sit here and tell me that from a strictly connection, familiarity perspective, that Bradley Beal's not thinking about Chicago. I just can't see that. And I would not be surprised that if the Bulls are willingly gauging interest for Zach LaVine, why not get a Zach LaVine-esque player that respects Billy Donovan for, the current makeup of what the Bulls have, which is right now a more veteran-led team. I don't know if that's something that the Bulls really should go after, but I'm just saying, like, when we talk about, like you just mentioned, value and what you can get back, that's a situation where maybe that can kind of just flip-flop and you might be all with it. Might be, all with everybody. Plus, the Bulls have a history with the Wizards. We definitely traded for Otto Porter and got rid of Jabari and Bobby. So I'm just saying that that's in the realms too. But Zach's gonna get more value regardless, just because he's younger. He's younger and he has the same. He's a more fresh-bred version of what Bradley Beal was to this league. But at the same time, it also, like you said, it just depends on who else is joining the party. Because the Bulls are so strapped right now from a asset perspective that they need other people to cash in on what they're trying to do. It's like bringing your friends to a party that no one's coming through. You gotta incentivize them a little bit, some way, somehow, to be like, yo, bring your friends, bring your girls. Let's have a kick and have a good time to hype up this situation, knowing dang well it's pretty much dead and no one wants to be there. The Bulls have to find a way for others to join the party to really get what they want out of this.
Yeah, I think a deal for Zach falls somewhere between what Donovan Mitchell got, or I should say what the Jazz got for Donovan Mitchell, which was 3 players and 5 first-round picks, like a massive haul. And whatever Bradley Beal potentially winds up getting, like, I think there's a sweet spot in there that I think the Bulls should have their sights set on. Again, I think Zach, when healthy, is an all-star and a fringe all-NBA player. I think he's better than Bradley Beal, but not quite on Donovan Mitchell's level, even though he has his own flaws as well. What does this news tell you about the Bulls front office? Specifically, what they've been telling us about continuity, and they just got through with this press conference, the end of season press conference, where, they talked about wanting to re-sign everybody, knowing, or maybe, kind of sheepishly knowing that they really can't do that without going into the tax. Like, you risk going into the tax, bringing the exact same team back. And now we hear talks about Zach LaVine potentially being on the trade market. What does that tell you about what the front office is thinking now, as opposed to what it may have been thinking, what was that, a month or two ago?
Lonzo Ball's not coming through that door anytime soon. I think that's really one of the biggest drives of this. When the news came out that prior to the draft combine, Lonzo Ball is having another surgery and he's guaranteed out for another year. That's going on 3 years of his 4-year, $80 million deal that you signed him to, and he's not playing. And there's no guarantee that he's going to come. Well, let's put it this way. We know he's not going to come back the same player. But it's not even a guarantee that even when he comes back, you really get a fraction of what you paid for. That's just the reality. So because of that, the Bulls have gone now 2 years without a point guard. And they saw how much of a struggle that really was for Billy Donovan's offense. To the point where they had to bring in Wild West, Patrick Beverly, right? Into here. And not to our surprise, but maybe to their surprise, he actually helped the Bulls in the right direction possible, which for them fulfills the theory of if the Bulls maintain what they have and they get a solid point guard, they're off and running. Now, because of that, you're going to have to make moves to get a point guard because you have no cap space or assets right now, really, that can get you what the type of point guard you really want and need to replace what Lonzo Ball brings to the table. And we know that is a lot. So because of that, this is where the draft combine comes in. Draft lottery comes in because we've been in the rooms. We've heard the discussions about how, since the Bulls are pretty much knowing that that Lonzo Ball's going to be gone, they're already trying to expedite that process. They interviewed Brandon Miller. They talked to Scoot Henderson. We heard the reports even from then about how they trying to talk to Portland about that third pick. They trying to resolve this point guard issue now. So because of that, how can you do that and expect to keep Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan and Vucevic on the payroll while also trying to make things work with the other players you need to re-sign and bring back? It's just not realistic. So I think they got a wake-up call and was like, oh dang, we can't run this back like we thought. Let's go back to our old ways, like we did when we first got here. Really reevaluate the roster and see what we can get for everybody. Everybody ain't safe.
Yeah.
And newsflash, I'm not gonna say that Acme wasn't big fans of Zach LaVine, but let's be serious. It's not like they chose this guy. He came into this. Vooch was chosen. DeRozan was chosen. Lonzo Ball was chosen. Alex Caruso was chosen. Guys like Kobe White and Zach LaVine were here before they got there. So they're not necessarily tied to them so much that it's like, okay, we gotta keep our own. They could be viewed as the outside child that they may not have a lot of love for. And because of that, it can make the job easier to be like, okay, what you want for this guy? It can make it easier to be on the phone and be like, hey, we're not necessarily tied to this guy like you think we are. We'll listen to your offers. Because we haven't heard anything about them doing that with DeMar DeRozan or Vooch or anyone else on the roster, except for Alex Caruso, and they turned that down real quick. So it's a buildup. It's not just one specific area where we're like, oh, this is when they knew. No, I think it's a buildup of from the offseason, the reports on Lonzo Ball, more news from the medical doctors of what they're learning about his situation, and then ongoing discussions over time where even at the draft combine, draft lottery, they're like, okay, we need to interview these prospects real quick. We need to do our due diligence. We need to go back to what made us so quote unquote great when we first got there. Because that aggression, that aggressive mindset, trying to do whatever it takes to get the best and to do well with the best, that's what got them to this point. Now they're realizing they can't stop that. Honeymoon phase is over. So now we gotta take another pivot in this direction, and it starts with your most expensive asset that you have kind of made it clear throughout even this past season. You're not as tied to him as you think. So it's a buildup. Now, will it happen? Like you said, we'll see. But right now, it's building towards a new direction of the Bulls falling for DeMar DeRozan to take the front of this thing a little bit and turn it into DeMar DeRozan's team instead of Zach's, which we could say maybe was the writing on the wall anyways, because this has been happening since DeMar DeRozan got there.
I'm going to push back a little bit because I think that by bringing in Nikola Vucevic to start this thing off, by bringing in DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, Lonzo Ball, they chose Zach.
Mm-hmm.
And then they doubled down on it by giving him that 5-year, $215 million contract extension.
True.
Or signing him to that contract. They chose him. They doubled down on him. I think he is just as much theirs as Patrick Williams is, as Dalen Terry is, as Al DeSumo is, guys that they drafted, in my opinion.
Okay,
in my opinion. Now, you mentioned just now about how if they pivot away from Zach and they do it without going into full rebuild mode, it's more of a retool around DeMar and Nikola Vucevic possibly. Would you be, as a Bulls fan, would you be okay with that? Would that make sense to you to like really hand this team over to DeMar DeRozan, who I believe will be 34? I want to say before the season starts, but definitely into this 2023-2024 NBA season. Does that give you any more hope for what they can do in terms of getting into the playoffs than what it would if Zach was still here?
No. Honestly, you could pretty much argue that at that point you're going backwards, because Vucevic is up there in age too. DeMar DeRozan is up there in age too. You got Alex Caruso that's getting up there in age as well. And what you brought in quality veterans to help aid Zach LaVine to this point. By you trading Zach and giving DeMar DeRozan the keys, even though offensively and what we saw from an offensive game plan perspective, you can tell that was the case. In some ways, you can tell that was the case. Zach, in his own way, had to like reinsert himself. Which was one of the fears that we've had with DeMar DeRozan coming here, because he plays one way, versus Zach, where you get a versatility Swiss Army knife. But when you get rid of that asset to bring and keep DeMar DeRozan with Vooch, what's your ceiling then? At least Zach LaVine raised the ceiling a little bit, because it gives a very much unguardable option that teams can't necessarily solve. But when you just have Vooch and DeMar, who are both 35 plus, you're not going to go much farther. You're going to regress. And you're going to do it with other talent that, quite frankly, could use their services. I think the smartest way to do about it, if they really was going to do a rebuild, you would have kept Zach, trade value for DeMar DeRozan, and then maybe do a sign and trade with Vooch. So that way you don't necessarily lose Vooch for anything, but you could trade him to where he can win, and you can get whatever assets you can get back in return, and you can rebuild and still know that Zach is still there. You still got a high quality, talented player that can not only put you in the best position possible to win with the current roster that's given to him, but he's box office, and he'll make sure and he'll put on a show for you. DeMar DeRozan ain't gonna put on no show for me. Vooch ain't gonna put on no show for me. Put them two together, you might win a decent amount of games, but you got to put the right pieces around them. They rely on a point guard. You ain't got no point guard. There's so many factors that go into this thing, man. So, no, it doesn't make sense for me for the Bulls to do that. That was a fear of ours because we saw during the season that DeMar DeRozan's number was called a lot more than Zach's, and Zach took that personally and came back in the second half of the season and dominated, which he should. But let's just say it would be very unwise for the Bulls to go in that type of direction. If you're gonna go that point, you might as well fully rebuild because you're not gonna go. You might be in the same position again with Vooch and DeMar DeRozan leading the front. You might be back at that 8 seed, 9 seed, 10 seed spot trying to fight it in the play-in. Where at least if you have Zach, he may get you out of the play-in. He can get you maybe a 6 seed or a 5 seed, bearing everything else goes smoothly and they actually get a point guard. But it's a lot of factors to this, but that ain't the route to go. You can't be that desperate to go to that route. That wouldn't make sense to me.
Yeah, between this news today about the front office gauging interest in Zach LaVine, them continuing to negotiate with Nikola Vucevic, what's going to happen with DeMar DeRozan, who's going into the last season of his deal with the Bulls. It's going to be a very interesting summer, and we're just getting started. Josh and I will be right here with you guys, dissecting it, talking about it, trying to figure out what's going on and how this team can get out of the middle-class rut that it's in. We're going to see what happens. But please, guys, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, The Bigs Media. And for Josh Hicks, I'm Drew Stevens. It's The Bigs. It's us.